Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our fifth wine tasting event for our clients at Presilium Private Wealth. We know that life can move fast, and it's easy to get caught up in the daily rush, never taking a moment to pause, to enjoy good food and drinks with friends. For that reason, we love setting these special events up and really appreciate you taking the time to join us. If you are at this wine tasting, then you are someone very important to us, or you are a friend of someone very important to us, which is one and the same, and we are grateful for your friendship and your trust. Before moving on to the more entertaining portion of this evening, we wanted to take a moment to thank you all. Throughout a volatile 2022, we purchased additional stock at Presilium over and over again, rebalancing your accounts 27 times throughout the year. It was wholly thanks to your trust in us, our team, and our strategy that we were able to do that. Because of this trust and the commitment to your long-term plans, you were rewarded with an excellent first quarter of 2023. A first quarter that provided us another great example of why we must remain committed to our approach throughout the uncertainty. On March 10th, Silicon Valley Bank failed. On March 10th, we purchased additional stock in your accounts during the severe resulting market decline amid the constant negative news. Since that Friday, just 1 month ago, the market is now up more than 7%. Yet another example in a long list of examples of why rebalancing works so well. Now, I wanted to introduce someone very special and our youngest member of the Presilium family, Riley Mayhart. Riley?
She's excited to be here. Has been talking about this since she arrived a couple weeks ago.
I bet she was one of our first RSVPs.
Exactly.
Now, we understand it's never a good idea to stay between a friend and a great bottle of wine for very long. So please let me introduce my good friend, Brandon of Vin-Decision, who's going to take us through a wine tasting of 3 different regions in France. Brandon, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you with us again.
Thanks so much, Jerry. I'm thrilled to be back, and I hope there's a few in the crowd that recognize my face or we've met before, at least virtually. But my name is Brandon. I created a company during COVID that is, of course, lasted through now, primarily existing around delivering to people some of the greatest producers in the world, at least in my eyes. And so I'm around 500 to 600 virtual tastings at this point. I love doing this because it is so easy to kind of meet so many people more or less at the same time. But I also really enjoy introducing you to some of these fine estates that hopefully you wouldn't otherwise have checked out. Tonight, we are drinking French Reds, and we selected the finest regions, or maybe the most relevant regions, if nothing else, that are in the market today. The idea is to help you, retain some knowledge when you go to a restaurant, when you go to a wine store. So hopefully some of this crosses over to that. But if nothing else, we want you to enjoy yourself tonight because these wines are for you and this tasting is for you. Throughout, I will throw up some pictures, some maps, different images to help place you when we go through each region. I want you to ask questions along the way, make interruptions if you like to. Again, this is for you, and all wine questions are relevant in my opinion. I've gone to a lot of school, graduate school included, but I've never went to wine school. And that simply means I have my own connection with wine. I've forged my own relationship with it. And I recommend that you do the same. So when I talk about wine, I don't aim for that sort of esoteric or really dry speak. While maybe there's a place for that, even though I'm not convinced there is, while maybe there's a place for that, it's not it's not how I go about it. So hopefully some of the language that I use will help you when you're ordering off a wine list or when you're telling your wine person what you like. And so listen up. We are going to start with the bottle that says Bourgogne on it. So this is Burgundy. So line that one up. We're then going to go to the Domaine d'Entrefaux, which says Crozes Hermitage on it. And then we're going to end with the Bordeaux. Do you need to, follow me exactly like that? No. I mean, check in where you like and what you think. But this lineup is meant to give you a sort of succession in terms of the body of the wine, the tannins, etc. So when we go to Burgundy, where we're starting, that is going to be the lightest because it's Pinot Noir. And when we end with Bordeaux, which is primarily in this case, Cabernet Sauvignon, you're going to understand why. So before we get started, cheers to all of you, the most important. If you haven't taken a sip, now's the time. Don't wait for me. If you've already been sipping because you couldn't wait, this is a no shame zone, so good on you. But make sure when you're tasting wine that you always smell wine. So if you were to plug your nose and try to taste this wine, you wouldn't taste much. The same thing happens when you're trying cheese. Cheese is very pungent. There's a lot of flavors that come. There's a lot of sensations that come with cheese. But if you plug your nose, you don't really get any of that. The same thing happens with wine. So you're doing a disservice to the wine and to yourself if you don't take a moment to smell it. Our nose is doing a lot of the work here, and all of these wines are made very well. They're great producers, and so you want to smell these wines. You don't necessarily want to smell a bad wine, and so you can forego that. But when you're working with great wines, most of your journey is through the nose, through the aromatics, through the aromas that develop, through the aromas that are already there. This is the magic of wine, and this is really the journey. The palate, of course, complements that. It backs that up. And if you like kind of bolder, bigger wines, then the palate does play its part. But the nose is everything for me. I also always love to first look at the color too. So if you have like a piece of paper, a napkin, something blank to put behind your glass, it's always nice to kind of look at the color because it gives you a gauge on what a light wine looks like compared to what a heavier wine looks like. And this is nice when you're at restaurants, when you're at different friends' house, you kind of have an idea of what color you're looking for. Do I like that lighter, brighter, translucent, ruby colored wine? Or am I looking more for that kind of black, purple, opaque wine? Either one is totally fine. There's fantastic iterations on either side of the spectrum, but this is knowledge for you. All right, so we are in France tonight, so I'm going to start bringing up some maps and whatnot. Again, leave questions in the chat box and I'll get to them. And I'm sure Jerry will help too if I miss it. The first question's already here. Is there a quick method to pour your wine in the glass if you forgot to let the wine breathe? If you have a decanter at hand, a decanter of any sort, just throw it in there. If you have glassware that's a little bit bigger, like the bulb or the bowl is a little bit bigger, that's kind of a natural decanting. That's why we have glasses, or that's why they sell glasses that are a little bit bigger. So either of those work. Even if you have one of those plastic attachments on top that aerate the wine, that will work too. Any of those, all of those are great. But if you can, and when you can, always remember allowing your wine to breathe is allowing yourself a better experience in the end. That's why we do it, because the wine is bottled up, and the moment you open it, it's a little discombobulated. All of this new oxygen is entering the situation. It's not used to this environment. And also this oxygen is helping it evolve. So it's helping it kind of unfurl and unravel. So when you have wines like this, especially, let's say, bigger wines, when we get to the Bordeaux, the more air, the better, because you're going to start being able to taste more as it opens up. Great question. All right. So we are going to France, and French wine in general, I know, can be a little bit intimidating, can be kind of confusing. When we look at these labels, for instance, oftentimes the grape is nowhere to be found. we're lucky on the Burgundy that Pinot Noir is there. And that's kind of a newer trend to help consumers, because oftentimes on a Burgundy bottle, you'll only see Bourgogne. And if it's red, you have to come with the knowledge that this is Pinot Noir. If this bottle were white, you would have to come to the knowledge that it's Chardonnay. These are the only real grapes that we have to worry about in Burgundy. But now some estates are putting this Pinot Noir. However, there's a lot of other things on here too. You're always, though, looking for the producer, which is going to be at the bottom of your label for this Burgundy bottle. You're looking for vintage, which is going to be 2020 here. And then you're looking for where it comes from. Ours is a Bourgogne level. So there's a few different places a wine can come from when it's Bourgogne level. Sometimes it might have one village name, and I'll kind of show you what that looks like. But that's all helpful information for you. It's telling you things about this wine that you might like already without even opening up the bottle. So this is important to kind of look down, especially if you're at a retail shop or looking at a wine list. So this is the French map. You'll notice that there's a lot of blank space, which makes it kind of easy to decipher. If we were in Italy, for instance, we'd be looking at a map that's covered from north to south with this sort of multicolored color in by section map. Because in Italy, there are so many different grapes. There are so many different regions. There are so many winemaking philosophies that it would take a lifetime or two to fully study all of that. In France, though, the situation is relatively easy. And of course, it gets much more complicated. But at least at a glance, it's relatively easy. If you've been to France before, it's likely you've flown into Paris, or at least have been around Paris, or maybe know where Paris is. At the very north, near the very north of wine growing, which is Champagne, Paris is here. You'll notice that when we get to Bordeaux, which is kind of almost really the southwest corner, not quite, but almost the southwest corner of France, you'll notice Bordeaux is right next to the ocean. That's really important where it is. When we get to the Rhone Valley, you'll see we're almost at the very south, right above Provence. So this is another oceanic Mediterranean area, at least the south part of that is. But we're starting in Burgundy, almost in the middle of France. And you'll see in Burgundy, there's no oceans nearby. So this is an environment that is generally quite cool, quite cold in the winter. And it's marked by long summers, at least the days are long. The sun stays out till like 11 p.m., sometimes 11:30. But for the most part, you have a lot of cool temperatures that help the grapes go to sleep at night. And that's important. Because when you have a region like this that allows these diurnal shifts from day to night, you have the possibility of a wine that is more driven by finesse and gracefulness than it is by its hedonistic tendencies. So when you're sipping this wine, which is again 100% Pinot Noir from Burgundy, what you should be looking for are some of these accents that are more about earth, more about kind of mineral presence, and less about this kind of massive fruit that's coming out right out the gates. For instance, what is the difference between Burgundy, Pinot Noir from Burgundy, and let's say West Coast Pinot Noir? Well, the difference is, one, on the West Coast, you generally have the ocean relatively nearby. That generally means the sunshine is shining nearly all day long. I know recently California, you haven't had that. But normally that's what that means. And so when you have a West Coast version of Pinot Noir, you have a lot more of that overt fruit in your face. You have a lot of more of that kind of muscularity in terms of its structure. It's a little bit more immediate. When we're in Burgundy, though, you take a little bit longer with this nose. You take a little bit longer with the palate. There's some of these flavors that take that develop a little bit more slowly because they are of the earthy kind. Does everyone see that? Nick, we're starting with the Bourgogne, the Demonti. And on that note, we're talking about in this question, what is the best sort of snacks to go with Burgundy? Whatever you decided to come up with, start with the lighter portion. So if you have cheese and charcuterie, look at the lighter meats, the lighter cheeses. If we're talking, generally speaking, if you're at a table or if you're planning dinner, what goes well with Burgundy? It's roast chicken all day. Roast chicken is one of the best. If you go to Burgundy itself, if you go to the region and go to one of the restaurants, roast chicken will be on nearly every single menu. And it might sound basic, what's easier than roast chicken? It's because of Burgundy is so kind of delicate, especially when it ages and when it matures, it doesn't want something next to it that it has to compete with flavors. So when we give you the dry aged ribeye example, which will likely come later tonight, that's going to be a wine that has some oomph to it. It has a little bit more grit, a little bit more tannin, and it can hold on to those flavors and that fattiness. Roast chicken, however, is not going to do a lot to the wine. It's going to actually exist more as an equal complement. So that's what you're looking for. Could you have a heavier fish with this wine? I think you could. It would look more like a pink fleshed fish, something a little bit meatier, and not driven by too much overt spice or anything like that. But you're looking for lighter when it's on Pinot Noir. And we'll talk about as we move to these different grapes. This is the sort of quintessential Burgundian picture as you're coming in from a vineyard. This is right in Meursault if you're a Burgundy drinker. That's where a lot of great Chardonnay comes from. And looking into the village. So this is an area that is still rather rural in the most beautiful way. You can take bike rides through here. Maybe some of you have done that. And it can be very picturesque, especially if you hit it right as some of the leaves are turning. You can kind of ride right on these trails through the vineyards, but know that these vineyards change very quickly. And there's an importance to each vineyard. More so than a lot of places in the world, Burgundians and, Burgundians themselves, but the winemakers even more so, are obsessed with soil. They're obsessed with this idea of terroir. And you've probably all heard that word before. And terroir is a complicated concept, but what it means is terroir takes into consideration the soil, the microclimate. So sometimes a vineyard is on a hillside. Sometimes it's on the top of a hillside. Sometimes it's on plain land, flat land. And then it also takes into consideration how the vines understand the sun, their exposition. Are they facing south, southwest, southeast, north, etc.? So terroir is talking about all of that. Those things, all of those factors, are thought to be the most profound influences on the wine in Burgundy. So that is to say, even the grape really kind of is in the background. That's why sometimes it's not even on the label. And what they want you to taste is this expression from a place called Burgundy. This wine should not taste so much like Pinot Noir. It should taste like Burgundy. That's what the Burgundians want you to think about. If you go to some of the great producers, they're going to take you into the vineyard before you even taste the wine. And this is how the rest of the world sort of got obsessed with soil and this idea of terroir. It's sort of maniacal to an extent, because you're like, okay, cool, there's dirt, and you think I should, taste this wine because of this dirt and, pay more sometimes when the dirt is better, because that's kind of what happens when you have a Grand Cru, when you have, the fanciest Burgundy ever. It's often because it's from the best plot of land. Well, that's what they think. And there is some history to that, of course, but that's the general kind of frame of reference where we are. If we had to do one, this is a great question. If we had to do a deep dive on one region, is kind of what I'm getting here as I'm reading fast, what would that be? This is a great question, because I think we're going to come back to this at the end, because I think that's kind of the easier deep dive, even though maybe I have a few. Burgundy is the hardest deep dive. And so sometimes that's why I like to start off with it. Burgundy is something that can be a lifetime pursuit. simply because we're working with just Pinot Noir, we're working with just Chardonnay. It can be an experience that requires a lot of time, a journey that's super fun if you want to really get into it. It requires your mind to work a little bit harder sometimes. You have to draw all these patterns, but the process of doing that is somewhat rewarding too, because you find these different villages that you like. You see the differences between Pinot Noir planted on the north part of Burgundy versus Pinot Noir planted in the south. And that can be really fun for wine lovers. And so Burgundy is, if you want to go all in on Burgundy. If you don't want to do that, then I'll give you some more suggestions along the way. That's a great question. To just illuminate this idea of soil, because it will be talked about throughout, but this is the only time we'll kind of quickly focus on it. When you look on the left side and right side, you're looking at the same sort of soil composition. In Burgundy, it's limestone. A lot of places in the world, if there's limestone in the vineyards, that's where the wine geeks get really excited about, because they think there's going to be a great wine that can be made from that. But on the left side, you have a very different soil than on the right. But on the left and right, there's only between these two, let's say 10 or 15 feet. No matter if you plant the same grape on each side, and the same winemaker is making the wine, using the same methods, doing everything exactly the same. The only difference is that the soil looks one way on the left side and one way on the right side. You will have profoundly different expressions of the wine, and that is terroir. When you have this compact, harder soil that looks a little bit more like rock versus this sandier, kind of dusty looking soil, well, you start smelling that in the glass. You have both the glasses next to you. One smells a little bit more austere. That is to say, it's not as giving and forthright with its fruit and aromas. The other one is very perfumey. It seems a little bit softer, a little bit easier. And that is what they're trying to show you. That's what they're trying to accentuate with each bottling. That's the most important part for them. How does everyone like the Pinot so far? You can write it in the chat box if you like to. I hope you like it. This is one of my favorite estates. I have visited them in 2018, and the winemaker is an American. His name's Brian, and this is the actual owner of this estate, whose name is Etienne Desmontis, would never admit there's an American making the wine, because there's this kind of French versus American. But Brian, the American, makes this wine. And since he's been making it, in my opinion, it has gotten better every single year. And this recent vintage, I think he's really understood his strengths and really pushing it to about as far as it can go in terms of greatness. And so that's why we brought it to you. Where do you find these wines? Make sure you're taking, the best advice is make sure you're taking pictures of the bottles that you love. Those are the wines that you should be seeking out. Those are also the wines that you should be showing to your wine people. So that is to say, if you go into a wine shop, you're looking around and you remember you have these photos on your phone, well, go to the wine person and be like, look, I just had this Desmontis from Burgundy and I loved it. What is like that? And that is the best way to start a wine conversation, and it will get you the furthest, the most quickly. Using words, and if I were to use words here, I would say that this is certainly a lighter iteration of Pinot Noir, one that has a little bit of that kind of cherry and roses to it, but a nice chunk of minerality is what's pervasive here. So a light mineral wine. That isn't just about fruit. That would be my one sentence about this. But if you have a picture, you can show that immediately, and then you're done. You're very good to go. Watch, of course, how these wines develop. Burgundy is known to age for 20 years plus on the regular and relatively easily. And so that's what these wines want to do. And even if you don't finish these wines tonight, you could put the cork on it, put it back in the fridge, and it'd be just as good tomorrow, and showing you a different side of its personality. And that's a great wine. Keep your questions coming. We are going to move to the second wine, which is Domaine de Entrefaux. It says Crow's Hermitage on the bottle, and I think it's the most colorful label of the three. Yes. And you're going to find now a totally different color. You're going to find now a totally different nose composed of an amalgam of different aromas. And we're going to a totally different place too. I'll give you just a chance to do that. Also, if you were able to chill your wines, I hope you saw the difference. If you're not used to chilling your reds, that's totally fine. But I would advise at least experimenting with it, because when you chill your red even slightly, it gives it a little bit of a lift. That means that the acidic end to it, your acidic finish, which all wines have, is going to be softer. It's going to be more balanced, and it's going to have less of that vinegary taste than if the wine was closer to room temperature. So when you go to these restaurants and they're pulling the wine from the ceiling, those are wines that you should A, think twice about drinking, and B, though, feel fine about ordering an ice bucket and putting that red wine in an ice bucket and having a cocktail first or a glass of sparkling first. The wine will be that much better, and it's worth going through that process, because when the wine's like 75 degrees, that vinegar aspect I was just talking about will make a lot of sense in the worst possible way.
Brandon, I had a quick
yes.
question.
Yes.
Actually, from my good friend Debbie in Jacksonville, Florida.
Cool.
Could you talk a little bit more about the ideal temperature for reds? Is it the same for all reds that they should be chilled? And what's the ideal temperature?
Great question. So reds, I mean, the longer I exist in wine, the less fussy I am. Which I'm happy about because I used to be the other way. So let's say the ideal temperature for red storage is about 54 to 56 degrees. I feel comfortable in that range. I feel comfortable about that range because it doesn't necessarily mean you're drinking the wine at that temperature. Of course, as you take the wine out from wherever, you have a wine fridge or your own fridge, you're taking the red out and it's going to warm up. The overall ambient temperature is going to warm that glass up. Your hand is going to warm that glass up, depending on what type of glassware you have. So all of these different factors are definitely going to make that wine warmer. So you want to start lower, if anything, rather than the opposite. Because if you're already starting too high, if you're already starting at 65, let's say, well, guess what? That jump to 70 is pretty quick. And that wine's going to get there faster than you think. So think about that 55 golden mean. I think my Euro Cave is at like 52. What you're thinking about though is that underground temperature. That's where a lot of caves are. That's the sort of how caves are made, cave. And so think about that sort of temperature, that dark kind of cave-like atmosphere. That's what you want to mimic. And when you keep it there, I think you're going to find more success. Especially if no one's used to that. That's a great question. 55-ish. All right, Syrah is next. Look at this color. This is kind of a purple color for me. Blue purple is always how I explain this. I guess magenta might be there. So it is darker. You can't see through this wine nearly as easily. It's almost opaque for me. But what I love about this wine, it's 100% Syrah. Just smell the nose. Holy moly. My favorite nose in the wine world is a Syrah. Doesn't always mean that wine's my favorite, but my favorite nose is a Syrah. And it's because you have this kind of smoky, meaty quality amidst a lot of that fresh brambly fruit, like blackberry and blueberry, kind of this purple fruit with that smokiness. They call it smoked bacon fat. I love how these things collide. They sort of almost on paper juxtapose each other, but they go together so well. It's really intriguing and enamoring. And when these wines age longer, that's intensified. But as I said, we're in the Rhone Valley. So we were in Burgundy, almost a straight shot down. We're in this place called the Rhone Valley. You should recognize the Rhone Valley by at least probably its most popular place is Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which is a totally different wine than what we're drinking, but it's relatively nearby. That exists in the Southern Rhone. We are on this little strip up here, right above the southern Rhone called the northern Rhone, as you might imagine. The northern Rhone, though, specializes in Syrah. And actually, let me show you another picture this helps a little bit more. So down here is a southern Rhone. Châteauneuf-du-Pas is really like the heart of the southern Rhone, and they make brilliant wines. They make wines that are sponsored a little bit more by heat. So the sunshine is very much all day, every day here. In fact, in Châteauneuf-du-Pas, they have these kind of stones called galets. And these stones that are actually in the vineyard capture all the heat during the day and emit all that heat during the night. So in Châteauneuf-du-Pas, you have wines that are normally 15% alcohol on kind of like the low end, or at least the average end. And that means they're bigger wines. When we go up here, we're in the northern Rhone, you don't have nearly that same environment. In fact, you have a much cooler environment. You have an environment where there's a lot of slopes. So a lot of these vineyards are on these kind of wildly steeped slopes and terraced slopes. You can see here, like a tractor does not work here. This is all hand, and it's all difficult work. But you also have an overall temperature that's lower. And you also have in a region that's primarily dominated by Syrah. So 100% Syrah is at least in this glass. Let me take a look at these questions real quick. What does everyone think, or at least think in your head, about the differences between the Pinot Noir and Syrah, and think about which one you like more? This is a really good comparison because it makes a lot of sense for which way you should go. I like this question because I don't actually think, Becky, I don't think I've heard this before, but the question is, can I speak to why wine gets a bad rep for giving people hot flashes? Oh, actually, sorry, I thought this had to do with the fridge. I can speak to this. So the idea that wine, at least affects you in a sort of detrimental way. Some people think sulfur affects them a lot. Some people think other things, just the alcohol, the sugar, all these different things, which, to be fair, all those things probably can. There's a big debate on if sulfur actually does that. But all of these things can affect you in one way or another. I have a winemaking friend who makes wine in Santa Barbara. And what he thinks it is, and I'm starting to think this after reading a fair amount of literature, there's a lot of literature out there about this, the histamines in wine are what affect us the most. So barring sparkling wine, so when you drink champagne, you're going to get maybe flushed, or you're going to get that buzz faster because the alcohol is moving through your blood faster. That CO2 really helps that. So if you're ever looking, tough day at work, you're picking which glass you want, go sparkling. That's what happens there. However, with wine in general, and I find this happens more with red wine because the histamines in the skins, that's really how red wine's made. It spends longer on its skins. It macerates in all of the juice, with the skins giving the wine the color. So the histamines are going to be more present there. So what you want to do is take a half a Benadryl, or whatever portion you're comfortable with, before you drink whatever wine you think is going to make you feel this way, and see what happens. So that antihistamine effect should fight that. Most people have, you have to kind of like look for this out of your way. Most people have no idea, but it's the histamines that are likely affecting it. Great question. The Entrefaux is 100% Syrah for the people asking. And what I like about this is that this question here is too, why doesn't it say Syrah on this label? When we are talking about the Burgundy situation, even though on our Burgundy label, it said Pinot Noir, now we're in a classic French label. And what we see on this classic French label is the place where it's from. So we do not see the grape. We have to come to the conversation with this knowledge in mind that if it's from the Northern Rhone, which it is because it's this place called Crozes-Hermitage, and this place called Crozes-Hermitage is on this Northern Rhone map, then it is 100% Syrah. Almost any place here, if it's red, is going to be Syrah. There's always exceptions, but that's a general rule. And so you have to know that yourself, which is tough. Though, you walk into a place and say, I like French Syrah, and will they likely point you to somewhere in this general vicinity, the first thing they point out to, yes, that will happen. Just know that you like French Syrah if you like this wine, because this is how a lot of it tastes. If it's from a different part of France, will it taste different? Yeah, of course. But we have the same general idea. Absolutely. But if you like this wine to the extent that you need to write it down, you like Northern Rhone Syrah, and it can come from a variety of villages. That's totally fine. Some of them are more expensive. Some of them are less. Crozes-Hermitage is a great place to start because if you like this, you're going to like just about everything. Crozes-Hermitage is Syrah in all its brute glory. It is not necessarily the softest Syrah that exists. There's lighter ones, but this really gives you the sort of crux of what Syrah is about. It tells you, if you like all this coming at you at once, and even though it's still like, in my opinion, this is still pretty light on its feet. I'm sure the alcohol is 14%. I think it drinks pretty well for 14. 14% is the new kind of normal 14.5 on the low end because temperatures are warming a lot of places. So this is a normal kind of percentage of wine, but I think it carries it quite well. But this is the area, Crozes-Hermitage, right here. It surrounds this hillside. It looks actually exactly like what I showed you in that picture. This is Crozes-Hermitage, and the parts that we want the wine to come from are this hillside. The Crozes-Hermitage has a lot of this kind of flatland. In general, we try to avoid flatland because it doesn't create a diversity in the soil to make the vines have to fight. That means if you have a vine that's planted on a steep slope or on a hillside, that vine has to fight for water because it naturally drains down. That vine generally has to fight for some sort of sunshine, and it has to fight for all the other nutrients as well. The vines, their own root system has to dig deeper than if it's on flat land, because on flat land, the vine gets whatever it wants. It's all sitting there for it. That flat land makes for a very lazy vine. And oftentimes that means the wine is not as intricate as it could be if that vine is fighting for its life. So this is why some of the craziest wine places are dominated by these wild hillsides and these kind of majestic landscapes. And Northern Rhone is definitely one of them. I'm going to get to these questions. The second wine is it's 100% Syrah. And would an aerator do well on it? Yes. I would think an aerator does well more on Syrah than even Pinot Noir, and certainly on your Bordeaux and your third wine. So if an aerator is nearby, put that thing on and see what happens. I think it'll do well. Do the slopes affect the water content? Absolutely. I guess I just answered this question. That is something to consider, though, because it's a great question. France, remember, does not use irrigation for, 99% of the country. It's illegal in most of these places. And so they are completely reliant upon Mother Nature. And so if you have a super hot vintage, guess what? Deal with it. These vintages have come before, so they know what to do. They can look in the records, the diaries. There have been hot vintages before and very hot vintages, but they can't have this extra, source or surplus of water. And so farmers, which winemakers are, first and foremost, they are farmers. They have to figure out how to utilize what they have at hand to combat that heat. One great thing, though, is when you have some of these hillsides, you have a possibility of coolness because that elevation. Sometimes you have a breeze that comes through. All these different things very much help, but they have to deal with it. Côte de Rhône, this is a good question too. Côte de Rhône is oftentimes a mixture of several different grapes. It's not just one, though for Côte de Rhône, it is normally, again, there's exceptions, it is normally a Grenache dominant wine. We have Syrah, and so if we had Grenache will show itself differently in that it is much fruitier. It is much more kind of rambunctious, more youthful, like that fruit is bouncing all over the place. With this Syrah, and you can have a Côte de Rhône made of Syrah. With the Syrah, though, you have much more of those meaty, darker tones. And the darker tones help out I don't know, masking some of the fruit and kind of integrating it well, in my opinion. The body of the wine. This is a great question, Leslie. What does the body of a wine mean? Means a lot of things. Normally it means tannin. So tannin means also what's kind of happening in your mouth. Is there like this grippy sensation, like sandpaper? If so, that will happen with our third wine. If so, a lot of Italian wine too. That means that there's more body, generally speaking. That's a great indication. Another indication, just objectively, is how kind of dark the wine is. The grape, Pinot Noir is a thinner skin grape, where Syrah has a little bit more umph to it. The two are not super dissimilar in that they're very stubborn grapes, Pinot Noir and Syrah. However, most of the time, if not all of the time, you are going to have a darker expression, a bigger, fuller bodied expression from Syrah than Pinot Noir if they're coming from France, like if they're made in the same place. And that means you're kind of just paying attention to all of it. Whereas the Pinot Noir would really go best, even though there is some grip to Pinot Noir, and there's allowed to be. The Pinot Noir is still going to go best with kind of that lighter roast chicken duck, whereas we have the Syrah, we're thinking about lamb, we're thinking about barbecue, roasted meats. That is kind of, in my mind, going a level up in terms of body structure, etc. This is a great question, though, and you're allowed to disagree with me. All right, I'm going to answer this question as it's here because my eyes are on it. Which Burgundy region, this is an impossible question, by the way, Robert, but I like it. Which Burgundy region would you recommend for quality, beauty representation of terroir from a sommelier's point of view? What I would say, so when I'm talking about Burgundy, what I'm always thinking about is price. Burgundy is the most expensive region in the world today by a lot. It beats Bordeaux for sure, even though Bordeaux has some lovely estates and some great ones. But right now, Burgundy is ahead of it. That will likely flip eventually again, because Bordeaux used to be ahead of it. So what you want to do is look for that perfect value in my mind, because not all those wines are worth it anymore. I would say look at Pommard. And you said Beaune. Pommard, I will show you where that is for everyone as we go back to Burgundy very quickly. Pommard is this place that is in the area that is yet in yellow here. So Côte de Beaune is here. This is that strip I showed you. It's filled with all these different villages. And so each one of these villages has its own personality, has its own identity. So if you have, again, if you have Pinot Noir from the top in Gevrey-Chambertin and Pinot Noir from Chambon-Musigny, even though that distance isn't very far, you have two very different wines. And what I'm saying is look at Pommard. It's long been overlooked. It is one of the most exciting regions. Even when I visit, the barrels of Pommard are often the ones that exceed expectations. But Beaune in general has some of the best value. Also look in the hillsides, the Haute Côte. All right. So this Syrah can age brilliantly. What is different also here is that the soil is not like limestone in Burgundy, and it's not like a lot of other places. It is this hard granite. So the vines have to dig through this rock that's in front of you, and they obviously have to try quite a bit to get through that. They have to dig through this rock, and when they do get through that rock, it is thought that they're bringing out some of that mineral essence and transporting it into the glass. Scientifically, does it work like that? No, not so easily. At a kind of molecular, at least a chemical level, there's interactions happening there that are far more subtle than just, like the granite taste getting into your glass. However, whether it's Jedi mind trick or not, these wines often taste a little bit kind of like what granite might taste like, or, after it rains on granite, that smell that comes out. I oftentimes find, at least with Northern Rhone Syrah, you have an intense minerality, like this intense rockiness of some sort that I always, of course, associate with granite. Who knows why it's there? But no matter, the granite is changing the wine for sure. In a subtle way, perhaps, but in a very different way than limestone and Burgundy, because those wines, Pinot Noir does really well on that. It enhances the mineral essence of that. Well, Syrah likes granite a lot. And so when Syrah is planted on this, it comes to be in a wine that's like in your glass. This is how it's happy with these different smells, aromas. It's because of this granite. It's because of those hillsides and the overall climate. Let's slowly pour the Burgundy. Slowly pour the Bordeaux, which is your third bottle. It's kind of a golden brown label. Keep questions coming if you have. I will pull up the map. This question is, how do you suggest we find wines from these regions? Can we just go to a wine store and not be laughed at? Depends which wine store. Take pictures of these bottles, because when you take pictures of these bottles, you're going to notice that the region is almost on all of them. For instance, bring up your Bordeaux bottle. I see that Margaux is on the very bottom of this label in the center. Margaux, if I like this wine that you're pouring, if I like this wine, then great. I can go to my wine shop and say, look, I want a Margaux, and this is kind of my ideal price range. And always don't feel bad about talking price. Price is one of the most important things about wine, because there's prices that we really like, and then there's prices that we're not interested in. And so price should always be there. But you bring in your region on your phone, let's say, and say, this is at least the starting point. What else do you have? What stores do best with that sort of knowledge? Smaller stores. When you go, I'm from California. I live in New York for the last decade, but which don't have very different wine stores on both coasts. In California, though, you have the Bevmo and some of these kind of really grand, almost like warehouse wine stores. Those are hard places to find wine in. Even myself, I'm like wandering the halls and kind of forgetting about everything I know about wine. That's not the easiest place to start off with. So see if you can find a smaller shop nearby. That's a great start. If you'd want to just forget all of that, look online. Go to winesearcher.com. And if you like one of these producers, type it in and see what populates. They'll find stores that are near you, places that can ship to you. Online wine is a big thing. So you can utilize it, but do the picture thing. It is my best advice. All right. This is Bordeaux. When you look at this Bordeaux, it is the oldest of the wines we had. We had 2020 Burgundy, a 2020 Syrah, and now we have a 2018 Bordeaux. So the color's a little bit, it has a bit of that age to it. When a wine ages, it softens. It doesn't become as kind of those black and purple notes. There's a little bit more of that red that comes out, which I very much see in my glass. And that's a good thing. Wine wants to age. It loves to age. And Bordeaux generally ages for about 50 to 60 years if it's made well, which is wild. Bordeaux, for those people asking for what's a good place to kind of get into, I think Bordeaux, especially today. Bordeaux is always going to be a bigger wine, yes, but that doesn't mean it lacks finesse or delicacy. I find Bordeaux certainly has that. I mean, if you just rip open a bottle of Bordeaux and it's kind of like a warm summery day, is that always the best idea? Probably not. Bordeaux generally likes food with it. So here's where you're going to have that heavier cheese. If you have a little bit of that creamier cheese around, if you have charcuterie that has a little bit more weight to it, or later tonight, burgers, steaks, all of that stuff, Bordeaux really likes that. But Bordeaux is a fantastic place to explore because the value is there. There's a lot of youth, especially in the right bank. And that means the pricing is correct. A lot of the youth don't care about having this multi-billion-dollar estate. They want to do their own thing. And guess what? That wine suddenly costs 30 or 40 bucks. So check out Bordeaux. We are on the left bank of Bordeaux. And I'll bring up the French map real quick just to place you. Again, we were just in the Southern Rhone area. And now we are ending in Bordeaux. right next to the ocean. And in Bordeaux, you have the classic left and right bank. The left bank is primarily where you're going to find Cabernet dominant wines. The right bank is where you're normally going to find Merlot dominant wines, and Cabernet Franc plays a role in there too. But when I say Cabernet, I mean Cabernet Sauvignon for the most part. Our wine, as I said, is from Margaux. Again, that's on your label in the bottom center. And Margaux, for me, is always a great place to have lurking in the back of your mind, because Margaux means sort of plush hedonism. That's what I think. I love Margaux. I always find that there's going to be something really appealing, charming, beautiful about a bottle of Margaux that's not always the same with the different communes. Because again, just like Burgundy, you have these different, they call them villages, but here it's more of communes, that each place has a little different spin to what they're doing. Our Margaux is right here. This is number 8. It's some of the best places are generally right by this river that you see. And Bordeaux is a really interesting place because if you were just to look at it naturally, it's a very marshy, swampy land. And that's not hard to tell because the river's right here flowing in from the ocean. But what is different from Bordeaux than Burgundy is that merchants always had the power in Bordeaux. Whereas in Burgundy and a lot of other places, it was primarily the church. So the church was making wine for sacramental reasons, for studying it, understanding it for their own sake, making money off of it. Bordeaux was under the merchant class for a long period of time, and the merchant class knew how to make this place popular, despite it being a swamp, despite it being a marshy land, not really fit for growing grapes. In fact, much of it was underwater until they drained it. I'm not exaggerating. But they also found some places that really did quite well with Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. Remember, I know you've maybe seen Sideways, where the lead character, Paul Giamatti, trashes Merlot and almost single-handedly took down the Merlot industry. But a great wine called Petrus is Merlot. So if you like Petrus, which for me is one of the best wines of the world, then you should at least give Merlot a chance. However, in your glass, it's 65% Cabernet Sauvignon and 35% Merlot. I'd like to know if anyone likes this the most. I imagine there's a few, if not quite a few. I think it's a lovely bottle myself. But this is from the left bank. If we had a wine that was primarily Merlot, it would likely be from the right bank. That's an easy way to distinguish. There's a lot of other things that go into this, but keep that in mind. If it were Merlot, by the way, then you would see that it's a little bit easier going. It's a little bit more plush right out the gates. It's a little bit kind of friendlier with its fruit, a little bit more of that kind of plum, kind of purple fruited, where here we start seeing that cigar tone, that tobacco leaf already kind of in place, which is classic left bank. A complementary cheese, this is a question from Debbie. How much does the fat of a complementary cheese enhance the experience? I think fat and a bigger wine go hand in hand because the bigger wine can take that fat. It can cut through it with its tannin. And of course, a wine needs acidity to pair well with anything. So if you have something like Bordeaux, which does have nice acidity, and it has the tannin and structure to hold up to that fat, you have an equal sort of complementary relationship. Good question. An alcohol standard. Do you mean an alcohol minimum? I believe there is. That's a good question. I want to say yes, but I also want to say no, because there have been very cool, I've had some lovely vintages that are like 12.5 Bordeaux. So my guess would be, I haven't looked at these rules for a long time. My guess would be the minimum is 12.5 probably. And the maximum, is there a maximum? Not really, but okay. Also understand all of those alcohol levels are fudged slightly. None of them are like wholly accurate because it's a really hard thing to be that precise. So generally they're going 0.5% up or down. But what we see today, at least, because those 12.5 vintages are pretty rare, What we see today is closer to 14, 14.5. 2018, what is this one says 14 that we have. So this is pretty normal. 14 is kind of where you're going to exist, especially with kind of warmer vintages. Great question. Merlot and Pinot Noir differ a lot. So think about our Burgundy in the beginning. When you go to Merlot, you don't have that tendency to be more delicate and finesse driven right out of the gates. You don't have that. You have a grape with Merlot that wants to give you all the fruit, all that it has at once, whereas Pinot Noir sort of builds it up. You're going to have Pinot Noir, and even if, you know, it has a little bit of oomph to it, because Desmontis, our producer tonight, makes wines with a little bit of heft to them. Even if it has that, the Merlot is going to be totally different. It's going to be kind of a blacker looking wine, blacker looking wine, where the Pinot Noir is going to be lighter, and you're going to have totally different foods that go with either. If this is your favorite, then of course you like Bordeaux, you like Left Bank Bordeaux, Cabernet dominant, and the ruling terroir here is gravel. And so while we don't always need to be talking about dirt, I wanted to show you why this actually is important for winemakers, because we went from limestone to granite, and now we're at gravel. These are the things that are the building blocks, the fundamental aspects, the structure of these wines in the winemaker's minds. And so it's always important to keep that in mind. Jerry, how did you like these wines?
I love them, and thank you. That was an amazing presentation, Brandon. Really, really good. We learned a lot. I thought all three of the wines were excellent, and it was great. Thank you.
Good. We all wanted to end right at the hour mark to allow you to enjoy these wines on your own. That's super important to us. But I'd like to say thank you, not only to Presilium, Jerry and Co. One of my favorite people to work with, always my favorite team. This is always an exciting crowd, one that always participates, but I like the energy you bring. So I very much appreciate you, and I appreciate everyone tasting and participating as well from home. If you like these wines, look out for more of them. You can find them. This was just a quick glimpse into French reds. There's plenty more. I tried to pick what I could focus on, and hopefully I did that for you. But wine is an experience, and so just let it be like that. Thank you so much. Good to see you. And cheers to everyone.
Cheers, and thank you again. Thank you, Brandon, and thank you for all of you for joining us tonight. We really enjoyed spending this time with you, and will continue to be laser focused on reaching your goals in the most effective way possible. We have many more special client events scheduled for this year, including more events with Brandon, and hope that you can join us for those as well. But thank you again. Good night, and we look forward to talking with all of you again soon.